Hi, Karen. Thank you so much
Hey.
for making some time to talk to me. What we're talking about today is management broadly, but also some of the changes we have seen from pre-COVID times to where we find ourselves now, having been through 2020 and 2021. But I just want to start by saying we're both possibly the kind of managers I classify as high energy managers. We love what we do. We love our jobs. I do think there is many, many more of us in the industry, particularly at management and middle management level, that are the real workhorses because the industry and the nature of our work possibly demands it. But I don't want to glorify overwork. The context really is our industry demands that managers work very hard and very long hours. But there was a point when we really enjoyed it pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get your thoughts on how we work in our industry as managers.
Yeah, sure. And I think you're right. I think there is an intensity and there's a complexity to the role if you're working in that kind of director of studies space. So there's so many different facets and so many different layers to that role. And I guess that's what makes it really interesting, right? And that's why people do it and people stay in that job. And you have to have that intensity and that passion. And I think for me, I can only speak for myself, like that intensity and passion is what gives me energy. It's what stimulates me, what motivates me. But that's my personal choice. That's the way I work. I thrive in that kind of intensity, for want of a better word. But that's my personal choice. I think it's problematic when it becomes an organizational expectation or when it creates a culture that may not be healthy for people around us.
So Karen, what changed in 2020 and 2021 in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think that intensity kind of changed from, driving things forward, right? Driving things forward, driving change or driving with a positive effect. We're always trying to drive continuous improvement to a kind of crisis intensity, if that's the term. And I guess initially, a lot of people have spoken around this. I know Andy Hockley spoke to us as a management team about it last year that, internationally, initially that was really energizing and it sparked a lot of creativity and a lot of people brought new skills to their role across the whole organization. And it was really motivating. We were united for this cause to get our students online and to keep things moving forward. But I think that the real change is probably the ongoing nature of it, the ongoing uncertainty and the kind of fatigue. So I guess in a regular work life, we have like a cadence through that year. We have the peaks and the troughs. We know when it's going to be busy. We know when it's peak season. We know when it's down season. We know when we've got time to regenerate. We know when we can take leave. We know when we can travel. We know when our teachers can do that. And we can kind of manage that energy flow throughout the semester or throughout the year. But that's completely changed now. It's the on, off, and people don't know where how that kind of rhythm is. And that can be quite kind of disrupting, I guess. And also just, people are probably running a little bit on empty. There are times when I've been running on empty. And I think maybe the changing role of the manager. We've had that kind of, as a director of studies or as a leader in that area, you'd have that professional development, you'd be bringing teachers along, you're talking about teaching, you'd have all the operational stuff, the timetabling, the recruitment maybe with a student recruitment team. But then there's now this whole extra dimension of supporting people kind of psychosocially, the kind of, what was the word? A lady from Deakin used a really nice word the other day. It was, the social emotional considerations for our staff, but then also for the students, I guess, and the knock-on for the students. So that whole extra dimension that, nobody really has any training in that. It's how do people do that? What's the most effective way to do it? How, everybody are individuals, all teachers are individuals. Some things work for some people, some things don't work for other people. And it's how to manage that kind of extra layer and that extra layer of responsibility. And that's, I think, what I found most exhausting last year, and maybe less so this year because my roles changed, but certainly last year, trying to keep myself buoyant so there was something left in the tank for me to support people and think about well-being for everybody else, really.
So Karen, what you're essentially outlining is the fundamental definition of the role of managers in our sectors has changed, and the boundaries kind of have shifted quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think, we've always had the, employee assistance programs. There's always been those supports there for perhaps one or two people that needed them. But now we're looking at a whole staff room, ourselves included, that needs some support and need to kind of navigate this uncertainty and navigate how we look after our own well-being, our own self-care, and that of other people as well, because we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to the students to have teachers that are well-placed and feel good enough to be able to teach effectively, right? And also as human beings, we have a responsibility to make sure that people are okay in the workplace and able to and are supported and feel supported in the workplace. And I think now we're a lot more explicit about that. We talk about that a lot more. And I think that's a real positive that's come out of everything, that permission to be vulnerable, the permission that we grant ourselves and everybody in our organizations to talk about. But it's still a bit of an unknown, isn't it? We still don't know, and we're not trained for that. So it's this kind of rapid learning curve, which I guess is also quite tiring. Yeah.
So then, Karen, what's your advice to managers in these types of roles where, the boundaries have shifted, your role is become much bigger than you anticipated or have been trained for? What's your advice to managers?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? I think as I touched on before, I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I think it's okay for people to know that you're sometimes having ups and downs as well. I certainly found that really important. Like, the honesty was really important with the people I manage, and that we're a mutual support network. I think really important to have check-ins, to know your staff, to acknowledge your staff, and maybe to shift the focus. So I found that, and again, my role's changed a little bit. I'm not managing so many people this year, but last year I found that like the first thing I have to care about is how people are coping, how people are managing at home. They're on their own. Some people really far from, well, everybody here is far from their family in Vietnam, but also some people living on their own, some people locked down in apartments, locked in their streets. Like, how are they managing themselves emotionally? Because that was the focal point. So everything started there. And I guess previously it would have started with, can you do this class on the timetable? So that was a real shift for me, and it had to be a real conscious shift, and to keep going back to that. So yeah, kind of that reshifting of the focus, but also I think kind of my own boundaries. So last year I started to think about, I always thought, I don't know, you might be the same, Aparna, I don't know, but I always thought that I had to work the hardest and the longest hours, and people had to see me working the hardest and the longest hours because that was my job, because I was the manager. But now I think it's really important to lead by example. So really important to go, I'm switching off now, messaging on Teams, I'm clocking off, I'm done. Or during the day, I'm having a screen break. I've looked at the computer for enough hours. I'm going to step away now. I'm going to go and stand on the balcony and get some fresh air. And just saying I'm taking time for myself now, and being kind of really explicit about those things. Because there was a tendency, and I'm sure there still is a tendency, for people to work a lot more hours because it's more work teaching online. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of extra preparation. There's a lot of extra, the bigger cognitive load, of course, but the bigger workload for everybody. So I think it's about being really clear about self-care, prioritizing it for yourself, so that people see that as an important priority for themselves as well.
I love the fact that you've said before to me, Karen, that in order to do your job well as a manager, you need to be the best person, not just be seen as working the hardest, but actually be able to function at that high level. And I think this is what it means to put yourself first. I was also intrigued by some of the examples of how you're making time and space for yourself, and how you're consciously switching off. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, last year was pretty tiring, and I found myself really fading towards the end of the year. I felt like I was really losing my sense of purpose, and then that was impacting not just me, but people around me. So this year, I made a conscious decision to kind of give myself some permission to not feel guilty for not being productive all of the time, and to kind of listen to my body and my brain and my emotions. And I would always push through. Like if I was tired, I would just keep pushing through and plugging on and plugging on. But now I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm tired. I can't think. Or, do you know what? I feel quite emotional. I don't really can't cope with this at the moment. And so I'm just listening to myself, and I'm giving myself permission. It sounds a bit cliched, but it's something I've never done consciously before. So I'm consciously saying, do you know what? I don't want to do that right now. I'm going to do it later. I'm going to do a different task now if it's work time, or if it's the weekend. You know what? I know I said I'd start learning to paint, but you know what? Today I'm not going to do it because I just don't feel like it. So I guess giving myself permission and not feeling guilty about not being super productive all of the time. And hopefully that's something I'll carry forward, because I think that's really healthy for me. And I think it's really healthy for the people around me, either, you know, personally or in the work context.
Mm. Yeah, so modeling practice and leading by example is something you've mentioned is important to do. I'm just curious, before 2020, did you feel the need to switch off and set boundaries the same way?
No, I think you know me pretty well. I was really bad for that. And I think one of the things from last year was, you know, I went to a lot of webinars, and one of the things that actually kept me going last year was a wellbeing project for the School of English staff. And that involved me doing a lot of research and, you know, listening to people like Sarah Mercer, talking to Rachel Roberts. You know, I've had a couple of conversations personally with Rachel Roberts around, you know, coaching and well-being, and kind of setting those boundaries and self-care. And no, I didn't. And even when I wasn't working, I was thinking about work, and I think I used work as an excuse sometimes as well, even though I loved it. But anything else came up, I would always prioritize work. And I feel a lot healthier for not doing that now. And I think in terms of sustainability, that's really helpful, because I've also tended to go hard, but not for long, and kind of moved on to new projects as a way to re-energize. And I don't know how sustainable that really is in the long term. As much as I enjoy moving, I love moving physically to new places, new adventures, and professionally I like moving. I think there also comes a point where it has to be a choice rather than an issue of sustainability in the current role. So I think, yeah, there's definitely some positives that have come out of this in that area.
I like your point about redirecting energy, but also having all this fund of energy. Maybe just for a second, if we can talk about energy levels, Karen, how have these shifted in 2020 and 2021? Are you finding you still have the same level of energy? Question one. And the next thing is, how are you redirecting if you're making time and space for new activities?
Yeah, I think there are ups and downs. So I think sometimes there's bursts of energy and sometimes there isn't. But I've actually come to accept that that's okay. I think that's really okay. And that means that I also accept that that's okay for the people I manage. And I probably didn't before. I was probably not so much judging, but I had a kind of expectation that people would keep going. But now I think I'm a lot more empathetic. I think we're probably all become a bit more empathetic, but certainly for me it has. And the last 2 years, I think, and it is 2 years, isn't it? It's coming up 2 years. I've been kind of thinking more consciously about what actually matters. And perhaps I still get frustrated, anyone around me knows that, by things that I can't control. But certainly coming back to that kind of circle of control or influence, or whatever the terminology is, and thinking more about what impact I can have and the people around me can have now. Not so much planning ahead, which was kind of my kind of mantra before, was always pushing for the next thing. But, you know, with like in a work context, that would be setting projects that are achievable within a particular time frame. So in a short to medium term time frame, with very clear kind of goalposts that we can celebrate. So that kind of sense of achievement and cohesion that brings the team together. And for me, I need that purpose, and I need that sense of achievement to motivate myself and to top my energy up. And then personally, just thinking about things that sucked my energy and making a conscious decision to not engage in them. You know, for me, I started scrolling a lot through Facebook last year. I find that really unhelpful. So I haven't been on Facebook for 3 months. LinkedIn might come off that next. But focusing energy on more things like reading and people and family and community and fundraising locally, and things that I know I can have some kind of meaningful impact in locally and in the short term, and then trying to work on those projects as well with the people I work with. So I find it those at times like this, purpose is really, really, really important, professionally and kind of from a community perspective.
Thanks, Karen. You mentioned the idea of reflective pause. This concept of a reflective pause sounds like what you're describing. Yeah. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so last year when I was doing, I was finishing the MBA last year. Yeah, great timing. And the last subject was an action research project, and it was quite short time frame, it was quite intense. But you know, that usually suits me. But anyway, in the literature, I came across, in the action research literature, I came across this concept of reflective pause, which I don't know, many people might be familiar with. I wasn't. And it's basically around just stopping, taking some time off something and stopping. And I did that. So I tested it out. And I came back to, I took 3 weeks off. I was doing all my work things, and, you know, we're going online and stuff. And then came back to it and found it was really interesting. Like, my brain had clearly been working in the background. This is kind of really unscientific. I'm sure somebody knows a lot more about this than me. But obviously been processing in the background. And then I came back to that research project with like a really different perspective, and like suddenly a much greater understanding of what the concepts I was looking at. So I'm trying to kind of approach that more and use that concept or that approach, I guess, in everyday life. So rather than just battling on ahead, taking time out consciously to stop and then know that the rest or doing something different or like switching focus actually does not mean, I don't need to feel guilty. It doesn't mean I'm not working hard enough. It doesn't mean that I'm not working towards a goal. It's actually really helpful. So yeah, I'm sure that's not a revelation to many people, but it's been really helpful for me.
I think talking it through in that manner is really helpful for a lot of people who don't know how to get to a point where you are taking stock of your priorities and making conscious decisions on how to refocus your energy. I think it's got to, as you said, a crisis point now where we are needing to refocus our energy, so we're not spending energy on things that drain us, but so we can recover and come back in a more productive manner. Karen, I was wondering if you could share some examples of the kind of activities that energize you and how you make steps towards doing those. I know you wanted to take up painting, for example.
Don't ask me about the painting. I did start. I've started. It's really hard.
It is very hard, but I love the fact that you've made a step in the right direction. So I guess my question, less about the activities themselves, but taking those first steps, because you know, it's good to have good intentions, but making a move towards those and translating to action is really where a lot of us fall.
Yeah, I mean, if we could use the painting as an example. So, you know, I've been talking about that. Some of my colleagues watch this, they'll be laughing. I've been talking about it for a while. And you know what, I didn't do it for a while, and I went to a lesson, and then I did nothing again for a couple of months. But, you know, going back to that kind of giving yourself permission, I was like, that's okay. So what? If I actually want to do it, I will do it. If I want to commit to something, I'll do it. And if I don't, and it doesn't happen, there's a reason for that. It's not a failure. It's just that clearly that isn't what I need in my life at this time. It's not a failure. And in the past, I would have absolutely perceived that as a personal failure. And the same as, you know, I can't deal with something, or I can't work on this piece of work at the moment. It's not a failure. It's just that the timing's wrong. And I think we all have, you don't get to this job without having a certain level of self-efficacy, right? Everybody has a wobble. you know, that if someone doesn't have a wobble in these 2 years, then I would be very surprised. Everybody has a wobble, but it's okay to have a wobble. And but going back and thinking, do you know what? I've done all these things in my career. I have this degree of self-efficacy. I know that I'll be able to do it again. I just can't do it now. Maybe it's not important for me now, or maybe it's just the wrong time, and that's okay. So I guess things on my mind at the moment are doing what makes me feel good, listening to my body, listening to my brain, which I said before, listening to my energy levels, not planning really far ahead. And that's massively contrary to my nature, but really short-term planning, or not planning, which is, you know, what's been the biggest challenge for me probably. And just trying not to get caught up in stuff that I can't influence, and judging myself by what everybody else is doing. I mean, that's, you know, I can only look at pictures people having a glorious time, you know, stand up paddleboarding in the Lake District so many times. That's a nod to my family, and I'm joking, but you know, I can't do that now. So why get caught up in that? There's no point in thinking about that. I can just reframe and what can I do? And I can skip in a car park, but that's my reframing. So what can I reframe to make things work for me now? And just being a little bit gentle with myself about the when and the how much. Yeah. I guess that's thinking about self-care. I've never put self-care first. Never. It's a new thing.
Well, I thought that example was very helpful. Skipping in the car park, but also things you can control. So I want to go back to that point you made about firstly making short-term plans and thinking very carefully about what you can control, what you can influence, and what you can't.
Yep.
I feel with our uncertainty now, it's ongoing. It's not going away anytime soon. And these are kinds of talks we need to have with ourselves on managing our own expectations of ourselves and the environment we're in. Could we talk a little bit more about that, Karen? What is maybe I'll use you as an example again, but what is how do you make plans for the short term, as you said, using the circle of control and circle of influence?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I hadn't thought about this before, but it just reminds me of the work when I worked in Nauru with the asylum seekers there and the case managers. You know, the case manager job is, you know, looking at what people can control in that part of their life in that time. And that was the work they do with people. And just thinking I'm quite privileged because I was exposed to that. And a lot of people weren't exposed to it, just going back to the fact that people don't have training in that area. So I think it's been really helpful. Little things like I can control, for example, how I interact with my team in the day. And that brings me a lot of joy. You know, just our morning check-ins and our little gifts and our funny photos and things like that. I can enjoy, and you know, the end of the week, what have we achieved at the end of the week? Like professionally, what have we done there? I can control that. And that's really important for me. I haven't booked any holidays, coming to terms with that. Might take some days off to do some painting. But really just, I guess, just consciously not, because every time I plan something, I'm disappointed because it gets cancelled. So it's just about the day, actually. Even about the day and the week is probably about as far as I get. And then ordinarily I would have packed my weekend calendar. And now it's basically get up and I've got a list of things I can do or I cannot do, and not locking myself into things. So I'm doing some training, but it's self-paced. I'm not locked into any kind of deadlines or assignment deadlines. So I feel for me that actually it's quite motivating. I probably do more because I don't have that pressure. So not putting myself under pressure. And I think that treating myself in that way means I also treat other people more in that way, and a bit more understanding and flexible with how we work with deadlines on projects and how we work on activities and tasks together. Definitely more understanding about and more flexible, I guess, more flexible with myself, which then translates to interactions with other people.
That was great, Karen. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It made me have a good think. Made me have a bit of a time to reflect. So thank you. Thanks for that.
Thank you.